Hi and welcome to another A Song of Ice and Fire video from Westeros.org. Today we're going to be discussing the so-called Pink Letter. A version of it has now appeared on the show, albeit in very different circumstances than in the books, and we're not going to be discussing it in that sort of book-show context. We're instead going to be discussing the fact that there are mysteries surrounding this letter, that's quite clear, and there's a lot of discussion going around. But we feel that some of the mysteries that people discuss are misplaced, essentially, that they're focusing on the wrong part of the letter and the circumstances around it. So we're going to be laying out the case for why we feel that's wrong and what really should be the point of discussion regarding this letter.
The letter is... Jon's response to that letter is just sort of a straw that breaks the camel's back, right? It's... Tension has been building throughout A Dance of Dragons with sort of the old guard, the officers of the Watch, who are very dubious of all his plans of, you know, getting the wildlings south of the wall and so on. They're really bothered by all of this. And Jon is, you know, we know that he's kind of in the right, like they have to do this. But he doesn't...
I mean, there he has sort of the whole defend the realms of men. They are men. He can definitely extend that to the wildlings as well. That's within the letter of their vows. Because
they're very conservative, and what they just all their lives has just been we keep away the wildlings, and now they know that the others exist. They know that this threat exists, but they can't shake out of the sort of institutional bias against the wildlings. And, you know, Jon doesn't handle it the best way possible. His response to it is, I mean, he kind of crosses some lines about what the Lord Commander of Night's Watch can actually do, getting involved in the politics of the realm. And the letter, the details in the letter are, I mean, the things he talk about, you know, 7 days of battle, and Stannis is dead, and Mance Rayder's hanging in a cage, and all these things are new. These are things we don't see. These are things that are supposed to have happened or alleged to have happened. And there's a lot of mysteries there.
We can't judge the validity of them that easily anyway. I mean, we can speculate on what is likely to be true or not, but there's enough to make us wonder, is this all really true, basically? Because it seems like some of it, you know, with Ramsay as the author, if one assumes Ramsay as the author, which, you know, for the most part is, I don't do a huge amount of theorizing on the board, and I've often been like, well, there's no point discussing that. For me, the point is discussing what a letter says and what is or isn't true, because Ramsay as the author, you have a reason to suspect that he's very much trying to goad Jon and will say what is necessary. There could also be some other complications, as we're going to get to, in fact, with Ramsay not necessarily knowing the whole truth of what he's saying.
Exactly. I mean, that's the thing that I think was most appealing about it, is the fact that we have the psychological picture of the character, and we can try and figure out what has happened and what is motivating him to write this letter and to do it in the way that he does it. He is, I mean, in the book, a brute and a psychopath. He's not a brilliant character. He's not he's not a smart guy. He doesn't have 20 good men to do anything for him. He's not a master tactician. He is a brutal sadist.
Yeah, there's some, I guess, you know, as we've talked about with Cersei occasionally, there's some cunning there, I suppose.
A little cunning,
sort of animal instinct.
Yeah. So this is I mean, some of the letters is, you can see it, you know, territorial display. It's showing off his power and his might, and he's trying to pick a fight, and he's trying to get what he wants, because it's a mix of, I mean, if what he says is true, but he's won this battle and Stannis is dead and he's a Lifebringer. It's triumph, and at the same time it's utter frustration that he's triumphant, but he's lost his reek, and he's lost all this stuff, and he wants all these hostages, and he wants all this stuff to
and I mean, also, if it had been, for example, if we assume that he is telling the truth and he has indeed won this battle, then why is he so frustrated? He should be in a good position to just go after Jon and get what he wants, right? With Stannis defeated, and if this has gone smoothly and he has most of his forces left, shouldn't he be in a good position to take what he wants with force?
That's interesting. I mean, at the same time, he is talking about moving against the Night's Watch, who have so far been out of it. So I would say that even if he's in a position of feeling triumphant and strong, he may, at the same time, not want to necessarily... He wants to goad Jon to cow him, to scare him into doing what he wants.
Yeah.
He doesn't necessarily want another fight unnecessarily. No. On the other hand, maybe he's won a much uglier victory that he lets on, that costs a lot more of his strength than he expected.
To me, the letter reads as rather frustrated, and there is a little bit of desperation in there.
So we have all this stuff, and we're going to discuss a little bit of the actual content of what it means later. But strangely, the thing that has always surprised me, because I was surprised, I mean, when people... It never dawned on me that anyone but Ramsay wrote that letter. And then other people came forward and started coming up with these various, what if he didn't write it? What if somebody else wrote it? And there's, they run through all these theories. So let's start going through a bit of some of the things that people have led people to question the authorship, and why I think people are making too much of these aspects of the letter.
Yeah, these supposed hints. Yeah.
One of the main points people point out is sort of handwriting. It's a point I raised as to kind of argue against people who are trying to raise a handwriting. Ramsay's handwriting has been noted in several letters sent in A Dance with Dragons, and often with strips of skin in to kind of make a point. Here's a piece of Prince. Here's a piece of the Ironborn that I've flayed alive and killed at Mokalan. And the script was he often wrote in blood. Not a great ink, it kind of dries and flakes, but it's for effect. His large spiky hand, he has a big spiky hand writing. He's not
very learned, basically. I mean, he probably learned it a little late in life. He doesn't have a particularly fine hand, so he's kind of scrawling.
Yeah. So Jon has seen one of these letters, and now he reads this letter. He reads it twice. He reads it, and then he reads it aloud to Tormund, and then they spend 2 hours talking about it and what to do in light of it. And I've said to people, like, Jon has seen the signature, he's seen the handwriting. If it didn't match, he would have twigged. And the description of the letter mentions nothing about the handwriting, right? So the logical conclusion, that's straightforward, is, well, it's just obviously Ramsay's.
It's what he expects to see.
Exactly, it's what he expects to see. But the counterintuitive argument, I think, is the one that those who want to hold on to the idea that it's not Ramsay, is that, well, it doesn't match, but Jon is too caught up in what it says to notice, even though, Tormund raises the possibility, well, if I had me a maester, a quill, and some ravens, I could write up and say anything I wanted. And Jon thinks about it and says, well, the details, he's mentally, he's kind of checking it through again, and that's enough. He doesn't have to think, oh, then the handwriting matches, right? No. So that, I feel, is really...
If there was something there that was going to make him think, well, maybe this isn't Ramsay, he would have... It would be disingenuous to hide if there was anything there that would actually have him twig to, maybe there's something about it.
I mean, it'd be disingenuous for Martin as a writer to kind of leave that out, because...
That's what I meant.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. But he kind of... If he mentioned something about the writing that was sort of but not quite right, then I could kind of see the argument.
But he'd have to leave a clue in there, not just brush it over like that and gloss over it and not mention it, especially when the authorship is being considered. Yeah. And the authenticity of the letter is a point of consideration. for there to be no hint there. No, it's just unbelievably disingenuous, and I just can't.
I just find it very.
No,
So obviously, then those who kind of accept that argument and say, well, they have examples of Ramsay's letter, and someone has forged his style and handwriting. So, and you can keep as someone who created a grand unified conspiracy theory. I know very well how this works. When someone points out a good point that you can't directly refute, you create something that is irrefutable in return.
Yeah.
In this case, you say, well, can you say for sure there's no one in Stannis' camp who can forge a letter to look like Ramsay? Well, no, I can't prove a negative kind of situation.
Jon doesn't know it well enough, obviously, that he could tell a forged letter. It's enough for it to be similar. Jon's not a master of distinguishing forgeries.
Yeah. But it feels very reductive to end up just piling on suppositions to kind of refute. Well, you're right. It does look. It probably is Ramsay's handwriting, or looks like it. Maybe so. How about if someone else? Well, you can't refute that. Well, I guess I can't. Aha! So you have to admit the possibility. Well, things sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. That's one of the things George answered long ago when he was being asked about some theory. I actually think it was related indirectly to a grand unified conspiracy theory, where he said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but things are sometimes straightforward. Yeah. And another aspect, another element of the letter is the use of the word bastard. The letter is addressed bastard. That's the only address to it. Bastard is repeated a few times.
And since I'm the expert on insults around here, I thought I would tackle that one. Well, we have a similar-ish case, which sort of contrasts the book and the show in a sense, because we have in the books we have Asha wondering, why men use cunt to insult women, and why. Because it seems to be otherwise they value that, and sort of why is it an insult, and then people were upset when the writers had Yara on the show using it as an insult. The thing is that recognizing that something is an insult and using it yourself are two different things. You can be a woman and be perfectly happy to use gendered insults against other women or other men because you recognize that they are insults, and you figure that if you're going to insult someone, I always felt that if you're going to insult someone, you pick something that they're going to be insulted by. Otherwise, it seems like a waste of time. So, personally, I'll pick whatever I think is most insulting to someone. Obviously, for Ramsay, knowing himself and, how upset he gets being called a bastard, the idea that he would use it against someone else, especially now that he has the vantage point of no longer being a bastard, he even signs the letter, Trueborn Lord of Winterfell, basically making the point, I'm no longer a bastard, but you are. It seems perfectly natural to me.
I agree. I feel
it's a very, very strange argument that somebody would not use an insult just because they're insulted by it themselves.
It's the most insulting thing he knows to call a bastard is to call them a bastard, because he knows from personal experience. And he has a big hang-up about it.
Maybe he wouldn't have done it while he was still... In his case, he might not have done it while he was still a bastard, because then he could just get it thrown back in his face.
Exactly.
Now, it can't be thrown back in his face in the same way, or at least he can say, legitimized... Screw you, you weren't. So, no, it's not an oddity at all for me. No, for me, I'm the insult expert.
She is. Then phrasing of a letter. There's references to the Black Crows, your Black Crows, and the Wildling Princess and the Little Prince, the Wildling Babe. And people say, well, this phrasing is unusual. Ramsay wouldn't use it because, like, Black Crows, it's almost always wildlings who use it. But there, the answer I think is very straightforward. Pretty much no one south of the Wall is provocatively derogatory towards the Night's Watch. They might be dismissive of it, but no one spends their time.
I mean, the most, wandering crows. They call them
They call
crows.
crows.
Yeah.
In A Clash of Kings, Amory Lorch calls Yoren and company a crow, and in a negative sense. Yeah. And the fact that the idea of a name, I mean, they call them the Wandering Crows even among the Night's Watch, the recruiters. But the connection of them to crows is not unknown. So, as a negative. So I think it's really... Ramsay is being derogatory.
Yeah.
It would seem a pretty straightforward way to be derogatory, to call them Black Crows. And why we haven't seen anyone else do this, well, we basically haven't seen anyone else feel a need to be insulting towards the Night's Watch other than wildlings, for obvious reasons. The Wildling Princess, now that one is interesting.
Is where would he have gotten the idea of it?
Well, look, the thing is, it's the wildlings who don't see Val and Mance's son as princes and princesses. No. They don't have that concept.
Yeah.
Nothing says that Northerners, especially Northerners who really don't spend their time dealing with wildlings, might not have the same concept. I mean, we know for sure the Southlands do have this idea of it.
Yes, but it's more like, for me, or am I forgetting something here? Where would he even have heard of Val?
Well, no, well, the idea... you have to buy what he says from the letter. He's gotten Mance and or... obviously, there's a possibility that he's lying about how many people he's captured. He's got one... what he needs at the very least for this information is to have captured one spear wife and tortured her and said she came with 5 others and she came with Mance Raider.
Yeah. I guess it seems like how he gets that information.
Well, presumably then in the course of torture and asking...
Yes, I guess it's more like... Because he wouldn't ask. So... How's that Wildling Prince? I mean, how that becomes an answer to a question is more what I'm curious about.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, obviously, if he's got Mance, the child could come up. Obviously,
yes,
that seems very straightforward.
That seems fairly straightforward.
Val as a princess, that one is an
it's
odder
like
one.
What it would be an answer to. It's like, because I understand torturing and asking, questions about, like Melisandre and Stannis' advisors and Stannis' family.
Might be something also that the child was left in the care of his woman's sister, and then that automatically makes her a princess. Obviously, there will be people who will say, well, there's a couple other possibilities. When this letter is written after battle, and we have to, I assume that he believes he has won. I believe he thinks he's won. I don't think he necessarily has. There might be prisoners. And then among prisoners from Stannis' group, would give...
Yes, that's true.
That would give you the Wildling Prince and the Wildling Princess without any problem whatsoever.
That's absolutely true. That's a good point. I think that it's more likely because, again, otherwise he has to leap to the whole prince and princess. But... prisoners from among Stannis who mentions who's on the wall and whatever. Yeah. He, because he might be asking more generally who's there, what sort of people do they have, and what's the situation. Yeah. Okay. That I'll buy more than just sort of random torture of the wildlings, because.
The other thing I find my problem with that language thing is, the language doesn't quite match. Is, well, if the wildling princess and the Black Crow and things like that are tip-offs that it's not Ramsay, why is the person writing this letter tipping off the recipient that it's not Ramsay? Why if it's
code?
It's code. What is a code is what the argument comes down to, and there's various arguments. Like Stannis wants to goad Jon to get his forces down, or that Mance Raider is trying to tip off Tormund about the fact that it's not really Ramsay, and that it's connecting several esoteric plots together that only the sharpest possible readers will have picked up on. And
Stannis as the author, I mean, the idea
let's touch a bit more on it in a separate section, because we've gone along. Let's get a little break here and hit on some of the problems we have, because then we'll talk about some of the author potentials.
Yes.
ultimately, I think the sort of conspiratorial theories of the authorship, I think they fall flat on a couple of grounds. There's the internal logic of within the narrative of why this ruse or this lie, which I think pretty much every argument for an author other than Ramsay fails to really make a convincing argument for. It gets extremely tenuous, and you really have to make a reach to buy this idea that this letter is the only way that a person who is not Ramsay could get the result they wanted.
And that the point of the letter somehow is that you're supposed to speculate about who the author is, as opposed to speculate on the contents of the letter.
I think there's a metatextual logic, the outside of a text, which is the authorial intention and sort of narrative construction of it. So internal logic, like Stannis. If Stannis is supposed to be forging this letter because it's the only way he believes he can force Jon to actually move and come down with supporting forces, right? I mean,
first of all, it's just so not Stannis.
It's not. I mean, to me, Stannis is perfectly capable, and I believe it's quite clear from what we have in the Dance of Dragons and the little bit we see in the Fian chapter from the Winds of Winter that George released. That Stannis is perfectly capable of ruses of war, of tricking his enemies, but tricking his friends seems hard to swallow from Stannis Baratheon. I think, couldn't he have just said, look, this is Stannis, we barely survived this battle of 7 days or what have you, lost many men, Bolton prisoners swear that the Boltons are not preparing to move against Night's Watch because they're convinced that you have such and such, and that Ramsay has sworn that he will have your head on a spike. And wouldn't that have gotten the same effect? Really? To convince...
Most likely, yes.
So why this whole elaborate lie? Another one is obviously, and this is a very different one, is the Mance Rayder argument. This is one that, if Mance Rayder, for example, I mean, people have to remember, Mance Rayder was for many years a member of a Night's Watch. He grew up among the Watch. He has adopted, he was born a Wildling, but raised in the Watch, and then sort of re-entered Wildling society. He knows if it's supposed to be so weird for someone to say Black Crow or Wildling Princess from, for a Bolton to say that, surely he would not have done it. Unless, of course, it's a code to somebody else. Well, who? Tormund. Of course, he sends a letter to Jon, and Jon will surely show it to Tormund, and Tormund will know, this is a fake, and I'm going to let him, this is, never mind the fact that when Mance leaves, they have no idea where Tormund is. They have no idea when Tormund will be in contact. They're looking for him because Jon wants to negotiate with him. He has no idea what Tormund will do, how negotiations will turn out. He'll have no idea that Jon will
show him the letter.
Will show him the letter and consult with him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in there that is bizarre to me. And it just makes no real sense for someone who left when Mance did to have an interest of his. To me, what the letter does is it charges up the Wildlings, who, this is a fight that's not really theirs. But it seems to be like a red flag for them. They really get into conniption over it. It's the behavior, it's the monstrosity of the things claimed. A cloak of skins made from the 6 spear wives and this Mance Rayder thing. I mean, it's interesting, of course. I mean, Tormund kind of wonders, what is this thing about Mance Rayder? We saw him burn.
Yeah.
Right? And the Wildlings must kind of, but mostly they see it as some kind of huge insult. Like, whatever that guy's smoking, he's insulting us and he's attacking us and we're going to have our... So, and they fall behind Jon's leadership over this. You can say, the letter is perfectly constructed by Mance for the specific intention of making sure that the Wildlings... Never mind, he doesn't know that they're there. He has no idea. All right? So I just find it baffling to me.
There's also one other detail in the letter which I thought of when we were discussing this yesterday, and it's the inclusion of, I want my reek back. Jon doesn't know who Reek is. Ramsay has reason to think that, well, if Reek has gone somewhere, if he's gone to the wall, well, then Jon will know what I'm talking about. So it makes sense for him to demand his Reek back. However, if this is supposed to be a fake from Stannis or from Mance, or I think even, Theon himself has been suggested, why that inclusion? Because they will know that no Reek has reached Jon, because Reek is sitting right there with them, presumably, or he is writing the letter. So it's a completely pointless inclusion to include a name that Jon is going to have no idea about, because there's no way he's going to have found out, because the person hasn't, if this is a fake, the person hasn't moved anywhere.
Exactly. It doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me.
That one just makes it even more bizarre, together with all the other bizarre details. So,
ultimately, I think, ruses are for your enemies, not for your friends. So for me, the only argument that could possibly make sense of that anyone puts forward for anyone other than Ramsay writing the letter is that it's specifically a very malicious intent. Somebody wants Jon to make a mistake. Someone wants to harm the Watch and harm Jon Snow, and ideally harm the Wildlings. And I don't really know anyone
other than Ramsay,
who would come up with this notion as a way to forward their aims. I mean, Stannis doesn't want that.
No, Mance certainly doesn't want it.
Mance doesn't want it. So I think you have to have somebody who's malicious in their intention. And maybe
we have the perfect candidate.
Yeah, we have the perfect candidate. The other aspect, the final aspect, is a metatextual. Like, the letter is this key to a huge event. It leads to Jon making a choice that leads to this consequence where he's assassinated, or at least attacked. People try to assassinate him, anyways. I think he's assassinated. He's dead. He'll be better, but he's dead.
What you said.
Yeah, but and the context, like what happened, why did Ramsay write this? What has triggered this particular letter? What of these details are true? Are things as straightforward as we're to believe them? I mean, there's the question is raised in the text itself. Some of this stuff could be lies, and like John, there are truths in it. Not necessarily everything is true, but there are enough that there is truth in it, and we need to act. As soon as you then go, aha, and what you don't realize is that the author is somebody else entirely who you believe. George, you have this notion of George layering like this house of cards of puzzles on top of puzzles on top of puzzles, but go all the way down,
It's just not how he works. We have seen nothing like that, really, in the books, and I think that people are just looking at the wrong mystery. There is a mystery presented, and it's not like it's bleedingly obvious either, so you can say, oh, this is a red herring. No, there is some real point to discussing what the contents of the letter, to then also add, there's a question underneath there's a question hiding about who the author is.
And why they would write this letter if it's not the obvious person.
It's just, I can't buy it at all, and when we first said we were going to do this, like, okay, what are we going to say? Because all I feel like saying is like, it's completely insane. Of course, Ramsay wrote the letter. Obviously, you can go through it like this and look at specific points that have been raised and sort of saying why they don't make sense. But ultimately, what interests me about the letter is what is or isn't true about what Ramsay claims. That's the interest.
Yeah, I mean, is Stannis dead? I mean, as I said, I don't think so. I think he has tricked Ramsay. There's a hint in the Winter chapter to his effects. That he has, as a deliberate sort of Roose allowed him to think he's won and has... And I think Lightbringer, I think that particularly interesting because Stannis has remarked that Lightbringer glows prettily, but it's no better than any other sword. It's no more useful to him than any other sword. And I'm thinking, well, here's a way for me to make it really useful as proof of my death to my enemies and make them think that they've lulled them into a sense of false security.
And obviously, as we said, probably he would have had to make a ruse that was convincing him, thus it would have meant sacrificing people. It would have meant people being captured. There would have had to be an actual battle or engagement of some kind.
Oh yeah.
It would probably involve that, again, the hint from that chapter about the lake with the rotten ice.
Yeah, I said Dance Dragons had actually had a lot about that. But yes.
But I think that would probably play a part.
Oh, absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
So he sets up a scenario where, maybe it looks like, he lures them in and then something happens and he seems to have been killed. Maybe he's supposed to have set it up so he looks like he's gone through the ice or something, and then they recover the sword.
I think the main argument people have is that he'll be luring a part of the Bolton forces onto that rotten ice and have him die.
Yeah. But how does he? The whole thing about tricking them that he's dead. There needs to be some. So his body is lost, presumably. Then.
Yeah.
And where they then get the sword. So I think that's happened, and it's enough for Ramsay to believe that he has won.
And I think also, some disagree. I don't think this is going to be a cakewalk for either side. I think it's going to be a battle where where both sides lose substantial amounts of strength. I don't think it's going to be... So it's going to be...
It's going to be costly for both of them.
I think so.
If he's going to... It might be that he's set up this ruse and it doesn't go entirely as planned and he loses more men than intended and puts himself in a bad position, but at least he's got the thing that now Ramsay believes that he's dead.
And speak Ramsay. Ramsay's on writing this.
Yes.
Why isn't Roose... would Roose let Ramsay write this letter if he had an ability to...
No, it is a... sort of, it's not a direct attack on the Night's Watch, but it is kind of...
It's a very aggressive...
And no, I'm quite convinced that by the time that the letter is written, Roose is dead or dying.
Which could explain some of the weird emotional state, because, that Ramsay is operating under when he's writing with it. There is all sorts of things going on, and but there's that sense of desperation. And
something probably happened at Winterfell itself. Obviously, we know that there's all sorts of strife between the various people who are in Winterfell. There was some fighting. I wouldn't be surprised if Roose was injured and Ramsay put him out of his misery, because an injured
put him out of Ramsay's misery, anyways.
Well, yes, but an injured Roose who isn't strong enough to be an effective leader is going to be no use for Ramsay.
Yeah, no, I think that's entirely probable.
I don't think maybe he was the one to actually initiate killing him. I think it's entirely possible that he was injured.
It's more of when his father is weak, then he takes him out. He fully expects that Ramsay is capable of this, having suspected that he killed his heir, and that he would kill any children by Walda. So he has to think somewhere that it's entirely possible that Ramsay will strike at him. It's only right now that Ramsay fears him too much, and that he has too much strength. But if he were to drop his guard, be weakened, it's anyone's game. So and so on. So we have all these mysteries here in front of us, and from the perspective of narrative construction, it doesn't make sense to lay all these mysteries and then say, you have to now question how bona fide any of these mysteries are, because you have to question the authorship to begin with. The authorship isn't questioned by Jon simply because everything fits what he expects. And it should fit what we expect. That Ramsay Bolton has written this as a provocation or as a set of demands. And what we should be focusing on, I think, as readers, as people discussing, is what has actually happened in Winterfell, outside of Winterfell.
What does that mean for the future?
And what does that mean for the future? And I think is the pink letter the place of the pink letter in the narrative is for us to just consider the content and not worry ourselves about, well, I'm being really clever and come up with a just even smarter theory.
There's such a thing as being too clever.
There is something of being too clever and layering on this piling on too many levels of speculation to the point where as soon as you, and basically I've seen this again and again on the forums over the years, and I did a little bit myself years ago, where when someone makes a good argument that's hard to directly refute, you kind of indirectly refute it by coming up with a new speculation, but they can't then equally. But it's a house of cards. It's really it's an illusion that you start making. There are some complex things to think about in the series, thematically, but even within the narrative, mysteries and things, and trying to figure out how it works. But
like spending some time trying to figure out who the harpy is.
The harpy, yeah.
Because that is a real thorough mystery that there isn't an easy, obvious answer to it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that's one where people have spent a lot of brain power to try and figure out, and they've come up with a couple of good guesses, and laid the arguments for why very well.
And that's a legitimate approach to it. And I think that's interesting when there are actual mysteries like that, people are less likely to be sidetracked.
That's an excellent point, actually. Theories that people construct out of thin air tend to lead to a constant piling on of sort of adjacent and related new theories. Because, hey, if this theory is true, then this thing is a new mystery. And I guess it's sort of like, lines of inquiry in theoretical physics and so on, where someone comes up with this clever idea about,
oh, this changes everything.
This changes everything, and then you start kind of, if this is true, then this would be, and then eventually someone does actually test it and realizes this doesn't work, and the whole field, that whole line just collapses. And I think people will find that some of these very elaborate theories that theory crafters put forward are just going to collapse, and everything that everyone built around them is going to collapse with it.
You don't want to build your theory on a theory, ideally. I think that if you can get to the sort of isolate a mystery in the text and say, okay, here we have a question about the identity of who did something or why something was done, and it's not tied into too many things, then it might be worth looking at. But when you start getting these too many connections, like having the idea of man says the writer requires some elaborate plot with Tormund, or even you bring up Stannis, then you're starting to think, well, Stannis has to be acting out of character and he has to be doing just some strange ruse to bring Jon down, even when he could just do it in a more straightforward way. So not really buying that, but there's a lot of I think that there's a lot of interesting, or you can't do so much with it yet because we have that one teaser from the Winds of Winter as far as the Stannis chapter goes, so otherwise it's going to be a lot of open speculation. But I think the question of whether the health and well-being of like Stannis and Roose are two interesting points. Obviously I think that it's more straightforward that he must have Mance, for example, because I forget, does he still have the glamour when he goes? He has a glamour, or
no?
He doesn't.
I guess he must have removed the glamour. He looked the description is he looks like Mance.
Yes. So that's not. But on the other hand, he wouldn't recognize Mance, so he needs to have somebody tell him that is Mance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with this, if he's captured Spearwise and he's captured Mance, it's pretty straightforward.
No, I mean, that part of the letter is probably true.
Yeah, I find it hard to imagine
him making up those details.
I find it hard to imagine how Mance would escape under the circumstances. The castle had been roused against them, and
yes, anyone who isn't a Bolton man is going to be under suspicion at that point.
Yeah, I would think so.
So it seems pretty likely that, and obviously there's going to be. I mean, you've got the Manderleys in there as well. Yes. So you most likely had some serious fighting going on inside of the castle.
There may have been, yes. I mean, obviously there was that fighting that we had in Dance of Dragons, but then they were being sent out to attack, and We know some of the result of that from the Winds of Winter chapter, but it's a mess. It's a very. I mean, Winterfell is something of a powder keg. It's absolutely true. And the battle itself, if it really takes 7 days, and obviously we're not talking 7 days of constant. I think when they talk 7 days of battle, I think people have to understand as skirmishing and sort of breaking and then resuming and maneuvering.
The conditions aren't exactly easy with the weather and everything.
So I don't know. I find it a very fascinating thing, but of what happens. But I don't find the question of authorship remotely compelling, just because it doesn't feel like the author I've been reading for.
No, I mean I was completely surprised when first I heard that there was a question about the authorship.
Same, never crossed my mind. I when we read it, I mean, we read it in manuscript. We read it before it was published, so it was like, what happened with Stannis, and what of this is true, and what of this is false. But it wasn't Ramsay. It just seems, and I mean, it
fits his profile. It fits.
Yes.
And I don't like the idea of saying, oh, well, it fits too well. No, because, sometimes that cigar is a cigar. And, sometimes when it, looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and...
Quacks like a duck.
Yeah, quacks like a duck. It's not a swan. It's a duck.
Yeah. Obviously, this is probably fairly unpopular among some for us to have said, but it's simply, I think there's a lot of things that people have done great jobs theorizing about, and then there's some things that they're just trying too hard on, and this is one of them.
Some of it has to do with the time between books. Yes, it's absolutely true that does feed into the we need to have something new to discuss, so can't entirely blame people for being inventive and such when they run out of discussion material. But at the same time, people need to recognize, like, if you are talking about a loony theory, it's a loony theory. Yeah. It's like, Queethy being a Shara Dane.
She is, but...
Yeah, but it's a loony theory, but she is.
But she is.
Yes.
All right, then. It is known. All right, then. With that, I think we are done discussing this. This actually, you said, this is going to be a really short one, and this actually turned out to be quite a long discussion, but I think it merits it. I don't have a problem with people who want to explore the question as such, just for the sake of exploring things, but I think once you get...
It can cloud the issue of what actually is the point of something.
Exactly. It clouds things sometimes, and people get distracted, and they start learning the wrong way to interrogate the text, the wrong and sort of the wrong motivations for interrogating it, and I think that detracts ultimately from people's enjoyment. I mean,
it's like Ramsay interrogating the text. Don't do it.
All right, until next week. We'll see what we come up with for next week to discuss for Ice and Fire.
See you then.